February 19th, 1945, 0902 hours. The black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima. Corporal David Mitchell of the 28th Marines, 5th Division, pressed himself against the base of Mount Suribachi as another burst of Japanese machine gun fire raked the beach behind him. He'd been on the island for exactly 17 minutes. Already, half his squad was dead or wounded. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The fire wasn't coming from visible positions. It emerged from caves, from underground bunkers, from firing ports that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Mitchell had fought across the Pacific Bougainville, Guam, Tinian. He knew Japanese defensive tactics. He knew how to flank machine gun nests, how to suppress bunkers with grenades and small arms fire, how to advance under covering fire from tanks and artillery. But this was different. Impossibly, terrifyingly different. The Japanese weren't defending positions. They were the island itself. 11,000 bunkers, pillboxes, and cave systems connected by 16 miles of tunnels. Every cave opened onto firing lanes that covered other caves. Every bunker supported 3 more. The volcanic rock absorbed artillery shells like a sponge absorbed water. Naval bombardment that should have pulverized the defenses had merely rearranged the surface rubble. As Mitchell watched, a flamethrower team from 2nd Platoon approached a cave entrance 50 yards to his left. The Marines moved with practiced coordination, one man spraying jellied gasoline, while 2 others provided covering fire. The flame shot 15 feet into the cave mouth. For 3 seconds, orange fire illuminated the tunnel interior. Then it died. The cave was too deep. The flame couldn't reach far enough. Within seconds, Japanese rifle fire erupted from the same cave mouth, killing one of the flamethrower operators. Instantly. Mitchell heard Lieutenant Chen on the radio, his voice tight with frustration. "We're burning fuel faster than we can advance. The caves are too deep. Repeat, standard flamethrowers cannot clear these positions." What Corporal Mitchell couldn't know, what none of the Marines struggling across Iwo Jima's killing fields understood yet, was that at that precise moment, 72 hours worth of a substance they'd never heard of was being loaded onto Corsair fighters aboard the USS Essex, a weapon so revolutionary that it would transform cave warfare from an agonizing week-long process into a 72-hour systematic elimination. A substance that didn't just burn, it thought. It flowed. It found every oxygen-filled space and consumed it completely. The Japanese defenders, secure in their belief that American flamethrowers lacked the range to threaten deep cave systems, were about to discover that the technological gap between the armies had grown so vast that their most carefully prepared defenses had become death traps. The caves they'd spent 8 months fortifying would become crematoriums. The substance was napalm, and the Japanese forces on Iwo Jima never imagined that fire itself could be weaponized to hunt them through solid rock. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Japanese confidence in their Iwo Jima defenses was not mere optimism. It represented the culmination of 8 months of the most sophisticated defensive engineering the Imperial Japanese Army had ever attempted. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the island's garrison, had studied American amphibious tactics exhaustively. He understood that Japan could no longer win battles on the beaches. American naval gunfire and air superiority made traditional water's edge defenses suicidal. Instead, Kuribayashi ordered his 21,000 troops to burrow into Iwo Jima like termites into wood. The island's volcanic geology made this possible. Soft, volcanic ash and rock could be excavated with hand tools. The underlying harder basalt provided structural stability for tunnels and chambers. Japanese engineers created a subterranean fortress of staggering complexity. The main defensive system consisted of 3 tiers. The first tier, just below the surface, contained machine gun positions and observation posts connected by shallow trenches and crawl spaces. These positions were designed to be expendable, sacrificial positions that would slow American advances while the real defenses remained hidden. The second tier, 10 to 30 feet underground, housed the primary fighting positions. Artillery pieces were wheeled into firing chambers, fired, then wheeled back into protected spaces before American counter-battery fire could respond. Machine gun nests were built with multiple firing ports, allowing defenders to shift positions, while maintaining fire on the same target area. Mortars operated from covered pits with precisely calculated firing angles. The third tier, the deep system, contained living quarters, ammunition storage, hospital facilities, and command posts. Some chambers reached depths of 75 feet. The deepest tunnels connected Mount Suribachi at the island's southern tip to the main defensive complex in the north, a distance of over 4 miles. Japanese combat engineers had created an underground city. General Kuribayashi's defensive doctrine specifically addressed American flamethrower tactics. Intelligence reports from previous campaigns showed that U.S. Marine Corps flamethrowers had maximum effective ranges of 40 to 50 feet. Japanese cave systems were therefore designed with entrance tunnels exceeding 60 feet in depth before opening into main chambers. The mathematics seemed certain. American flamethrowers couldn't reach deep enough to threaten defenders in the main cave systems. The volcanic rock itself provided additional protection. Unlike limestone caves that could collapse under sustained fire, volcanic rock was remarkably resistant to both explosives and heat. Artillery shells that penetrated cave mouths would detonate against rock walls, their energy absorbed harmlessly by the surrounding stone. Even direct hits by naval shells' 16-inch projectiles weighing over 2,600 pounds created craters but rarely collapsed tunnel systems. Japanese doctrine for cave defense was brutally simple: allow American forces to approach to point-blank range. Kill the flamethrower operators. First, they were identifiable by their bulky equipment and operated in small teams. Without flamethrowers, American infantry couldn't clear caves effectively. They would be forced to either bypass positions, leaving Japanese forces in their rear, or commit to frontal assaults that would produce catastrophic casualties. The pre-invasion bombardment seemed to confirm Japanese confidence. For 74 consecutive days, American naval vessels and aircraft pounded Iwo Jima. Over 22,000 shells from battleship main batteries struck the 8-square-mile island. B-24 Liberator bombers dropped 6,800 tons of bombs. The island's surface was transformed into a moonscape of overlapping craters. Yet when the bombardment lifted on February 19th, Japanese defenders emerged from their caves largely intact. The fortifications had absorbed punishment that should have annihilated any conventional defensive system. American intelligence had identified perhaps 30% of the actual defensive positions. The remaining 70% remained completely hidden, their concealment so effective that photo reconnaissance showed only undisturbed volcanic terrain. Marine Corps planners estimated the battle would require 72 hours to secure the island. The estimate was based on previous Pacific campaigns where Japanese resistance, though fanatical, eventually collapsed under superior American firepower. What planners failed to comprehend was that Kuribayashi had created something unprecedented, a defensive system specifically designed to neutralize American firepower advantages. The first waves of Marines hit the beaches at 0900 hours on February 19, 1945. For the first 17 minutes, resistance seemed light. Marines advanced inland with surprising ease. Some units reached objectives that weren't supposed to be secured until late afternoon. Then, Kuribayashi sprang his trap. From 1,150 cave mouths, bunker apertures, and hidden firing ports, Japanese forces opened fire simultaneously. The entire southern third of the island erupted with overlapping fields of machine gun fire, mortar explosions, and artillery strikes. Marines who had been advancing rapidly found themselves pinned in open terrain with no cover except the volcanic sand itself. The casualty rate in the first hour exceeded all projections. The beach became a killing field where every square yard was covered by fire from multiple positions. Medical corpsmen attempting to reach wounded Marines were cut down. Amtraks attempting to evacuate casualties were destroyed by artillery. The carefully rehearsed battle plan disintegrated under fire that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Flamethrower teams, critical for reducing Japanese strongpoints, became priority targets. Japanese riflemen were specifically trained to identify flamethrower operators by their equipment, silhouette, and target them preferentially. Of the 48 flamethrower teams that landed with the first wave, 33 suffered casualties within the first 90 minutes. The remaining teams quickly discovered that their weapons were inadequate for the task at hand. Sergeant James Whitley, commanding a flamethrower section with the 27th Marines, encountered his first cave position at 1,045 hours. The cave mouth was approximately 4 feet in diameter, carved into the base of a rocky outcrop. Japanese machine gun fire had been emanating from the position for 30 minutes, pinning down 2 rifle squads. Whitley's team approached using standard doctrine infantry suppression fire, followed by flamethrower assault. Private Eugene Roberts, the flamethrower operator, positioned himself 10 feet from the cave entrance and opened fire. The jellied gasoline stream, pressurized by nitrogen, shot 42 feet well into the cave mouth. For 4 seconds, flame filled the visible tunnel. The machine gun fire ceased. Whitley's team prepared to move forward. Then, impossibly, Japanese fire resumed from the same position. The cave was too deep. The flame had scorched the entrance tunnel but hadn't reached the main chamber where the defenders waited. Roberts fired again, expending more fuel. Again, the fire penetrated perhaps 40 feet before dying out. Again, Japanese fire resumed once the flame cleared. Whitley radioed his company commander. Flamethrowers insufficient for deep cave systems. Recommend explosives or seal positions and bypass. The response was immediate and frustrating. Negative on bypass. All caves must be cleared. We cannot leave active positions in our rear. Whitley understood the logic. Japanese defenders left behind American lines would emerge at night to attack command posts, supply dumps, and artillery positions. Every cave had to be neutralized. But how? The pattern repeated itself across the entire beachhead. Flamethrower teams would clear entrance tunnels only to have positions reoccupied within minutes. Demolition teams attempting to seal caves with explosives discovered that the volcanic rock was remarkably blast-resistant. A satchel charge that would collapse a wooden bunker merely chipped the rock surrounding a cave mouth. Larger charges blocked entrances temporarily, but Japanese engineers would dig new openings within hours. By nightfall on February 19th, Marine casualties exceeded 2,500 killed and wounded. Less than 10% of identified cave systems had been permanently neutralized. The mathematics were becoming brutally clear. At current attrition rates, securing Iwo Jima would require weeks, not days, and would cost casualties approaching 50% of the assault force. That evening, aboard the command ship USS Auburn, Lieutenant General Holland Howlin' Mad Smith confronted the tactical crisis. His staff presented casualty projections based on the day's fighting. If the battle continued at current attrition rates, total Marine casualties would exceed 26,000 more than the entire Japanese garrison. The strategic prize of Iwo Jima, a base for P-51 Mustang fighters to escort B-29 bombers to Japan, wasn't worth that cost. Smith demanded solutions. His operations officer, Colonel Robert Hoggaboom, presented several options. Seal caves and bypass them. Unacceptable left Japanese forces in American rear areas. Request additional troops. Impossible no reserves were available, and shipping was committed to the upcoming Okinawa operation. Increase naval gunfire support. Ineffective, the bombardment had proven that conventional explosives couldn't destroy deep cave systems. Then Captain James Crockett, the chemical warfare officer for 5th Amphibious Corps, mentioned an experimental weapon that had seen limited use in Europe, but never in the Pacific theater. Napalm, jellied gasoline that could be dropped from aircraft or projected from ground-based systems. Unlike conventional flamethrowers that burned for seconds, napalm continued burning for minutes. Unlike liquid gasoline that dispersed on contact, napalm stuck to surfaces and flowed into confined spaces. Smith had heard of napalm but understood it primarily as an anti-personnel weapon against troops in the open. Crockett explained that recent testing at WWII Proving Ground in Utah had demonstrated unexpected effectiveness against fortified positions. The jellied gasoline didn't just burn, it consumed oxygen. In confined spaces like caves and bunkers, napalm created a two-stage killing mechanism. First, the fire itself caused immediate casualties. Second, the fire consumed all available oxygen, asphyxiating anyone who survived the initial flames. More significantly, napalm's adhesive properties meant it flowed into spaces that conventional flame couldn't reach. Poured into a cave mouth, napalm would run downhill, following tunnel contours, pooling in chambers, finding every oxygen-containing space. The burning time, 8 to 10 minutes per application, was sufficient for the flames to reach deep into cave systems that defeated conventional flamethrowers. Smith made his decision immediately. Get me napalm, all of it. I don't care where it comes from. Strip it from every depot between here and Hawaii, if you have to. And get me pilots who know how to drop it accurately. What Smith didn't know was that his desperate request for an experimental weapon would initiate the largest combat deployment of napalm in World War II and would revolutionize cave warfare forever. The development of napalm had begun 3 years earlier, in 1942, at a secret laboratory at Harvard University. Dr. Louis Fieser, an organic chemist specializing in petroleum products, had been tasked by the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service with solving a persistent problem. Liquid gasoline, while highly flammable, was an ineffective incendiary weapon. It dispersed too rapidly when dropped from aircraft. It evaporated quickly when sprayed from ground projectors. It didn't stick to targets. Fieser's team experimented with various thickening agents, rubber, latex, synthetic polymers. The breakthrough came when they combined naphthenic acid and palmitic acid with gasoline, creating a gel that could be easily manufactured, stored safely, and deployed effectively. The team coined the name napalm from the chemical components naphthenic and palmitic. Early napalm was a revelation. The jellied gasoline could be mixed in field conditions by adding aluminum soap powder to standard gasoline. The resulting gel was thick enough to stick to vertical surfaces, but fluid enough to be pumped through standard fuel systems. When ignited, napalm burned at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel. The burning time, 8 to 10 minutes, was 20 times longer than liquid gasoline. Initial combat use focused on strategic bombing. In July 1944, B-29 bombers dropped napalm-filled bombs on Japanese cities, creating firestorms that devastated urban areas. The weapon's effectiveness against structures was undeniable, but concerns about civilian casualties limited its use. Military planners sought tactical applications that would spare civilian populations while maintaining military effectiveness. In Europe, limited napalm deployment against German bunkers demonstrated potential for fortification destruction. P-47 Thunderbolts dropped napalm-filled belly tanks against Siegfried Line pillboxes with mixed results. The weapon was effective when it hit directly but required precise delivery that fighter bombers couldn't guarantee. Ground forces requested a man-portable system that could project napalm with the accuracy of conventional flamethrowers but at longer ranges. The result was the M2 portable flamethrower modified to use napalm instead of liquid gasoline. Testing showed dramatic improvements. Maximum effective range increased from 45 feet to 70 feet. Burning time per burst increased from 3 seconds to 8 seconds. Most significantly, the napalm gel adhered to surfaces and continued burning even when the initial flame appeared extinguished. But bureaucratic inertia delayed Pacific deployment. Marine Corps procurement officers, focused on proven weapons, saw little need for an experimental incendiary system. Standard flamethrowers had proven adequate in previous campaigns. Napalm remained classified as experimental and was not included in standard table of organization and equipment for Marine infantry units. The Iwo Jima crisis changed everything. Captain Crockett's emergency request for napalm triggered a logistics miracle. At Tinian, 400 miles north of Iwo Jima, quartermasters discovered 240 barrels of napalm concentrate stockpiled for potential use against Japanese cities. At Guam, another 360 barrels were found in chemical warfare depots. At Pearl Harbor, emergency orders went out to strip every barrel of napalm from every depot in the Hawaiian Islands. Within 18 hours of Smith's order, the first napalm shipment was being loaded aboard cargo aircraft for immediate delivery to Iwo Jima. Simultaneously, Marine Corps aviation units received urgent orders to configure F-4U Corsair fighters for napalm delivery. The modification was simple: replace bombs with napalm-filled drop tanks. Each Corsair could carry two 150-gallon tanks, 300 gallons of jellied death that could be dropped with dive bomber accuracy. The first napalm-equipped Corsairs launched from the USS Essex on the morning of February 21st, 72 hours after the initial landing. Major Robert Gaylor, commanding VMF 214, led 12 Corsairs loaded with napalm toward Mount Suribachi, where Japanese resistance remained fierce despite 2 days of continuous assault. Gaylor's orders were specific: target cave mouths on Suribachi's northern slopes that had resisted all conventional attacks. Gaylor's first pass dropped 2 napalm tanks directly onto a large cave complex that had been pinpointing marine positions with artillery fire. The jellied gasoline splashed across the cave mouth and ignited on impact. Orange flames rolled into the cave entrance and disappeared into the darkness. For 8 minutes, smoke poured from multiple fissures across the slope, evidence that the cave system was far more extensive than surface reconnaissance suggested. Then the artillery fire ceased, permanently. Marine forward observers reported that the position remained silent for the remainder of the battle. Subsequent investigation revealed why. The napalm had flowed through the entrance tunnel, following gravity into the main chamber 30 feet below. There, it pooled and burned with such intensity that the chamber temperature exceeded 1,000 degrees. The artillery crew died not from burns but from oxygen deprivation. The fire consumed all breathable air within 90 seconds. More significantly, the intense heat detonated stored artillery ammunition. The resulting secondary explosions collapsed portions of the tunnel system, sealing the position permanently. A single napalm strike had accomplished what 3 days of conventional attacks could not: permanent neutralization of a hardened artillery position. Gaylor immediately radioed his observations to fleet headquarters. Napalm highly effective against cave systems. Request maximum ordnance conversion to napalm delivery. The response exceeded all expectations. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, monitoring the Iwo Jima battle from Pearl Harbor, recognized the strategic implications immediately. If napalm could neutralize Japanese cave defenses, the tactical stalemate could be broken. He ordered every available napalm barrel in the Pacific Theater shipped to Iwo Jima on priority airlift. More dramatically, he authorized conversion of 20% of all marine aviation ordnance to napalm delivery. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. By February 22nd, 48 Corsairs from 3 Marine fighter squadrons were flying napalm strikes against Japanese cave positions. The pilots quickly developed tactics optimized for cave warfare. Unlike conventional bombs that required direct hits, napalm only needed to reach the general vicinity of cave mouths. The jellied gasoline would flow into openings through gravity and burning expansion. The optimal delivery profile was a 30-degree dive releasing tanks at 300 feet altitude. This gave the napalm sufficient velocity to penetrate cave mouths while keeping aircraft above the effective range of Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Pilots aimed for positions just upslope from cave entrances, allowing gravity to carry the burning gel into the openings. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was immediate and devastating. Soldiers who had felt secure in their underground fortresses suddenly faced a weapon that hunted them through solid rock. The fire didn't stop at cave mouths. It flowed deeper, seeking oxygen, consuming breathable air, creating temperatures that made the caves uninhabitable even after the flames died. Corporal Mitchell, still fighting on Suribachi's slopes, witnessed the transformation firsthand. A cave complex that had pinned his platoon for 18 hours became silent within minutes of a napalm strike. When engineers finally entered the position days later, they found 53 Japanese soldiers dead, not from burns but from asphyxiation. The cave's air had been completely replaced by carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide from the napalm fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The systematic napalm campaign began in earnest on February 23rd. Marine aviation planners divided Iwo Jima into grid squares and assigned each square to specific Corsair flights. The goal was comprehensive: strike every identified cave position with napalm, then restrike any positions that showed continued resistance. The campaign would run continuously until Japanese defensive fire ceased or ammunition was exhausted. The logistics were staggering. Each Corsair strike consumed 300 gallons of napalm. 48 aircraft flying 4 sorties per day required 57,600 gallons daily. The supply chain, hastily organized across the Pacific, struggled to keep pace. Cargo aircraft flew continuous shuttles from rear area depots to Iwo Jima's newly captured Airfield No. 1. Drums of napalm concentrate were mixed with aviation gasoline by marine engineers working around the clock. The mixing process was dangerous. Napalm concentrate aluminum naphthenate powder had to be carefully blended with gasoline in precise ratios. Too little concentrate and the mixture wouldn't gel properly. Too much, and it became too thick to flow through fuel lines. The Marines doing this work operated in the open, under occasional Japanese artillery fire, mixing thousands of gallons of explosives daily. Remarkably, no major accidents occurred. The first comprehensive napalm strike hit Suribachi's northern slopes on the morning of February 23rd. 18 Corsairs attacked 46 identified cave positions in coordinated waves. Each cave received multiple strikes first to introduce the napalm, subsequent strikes to maintain burning and ensure deep penetration. The attack lasted 90 minutes. By noon, Japanese fire from Suribachi had decreased by an estimated 60%. That afternoon, Marine infantry from the 28th Regiment began their 4th day of assaulting Suribachi. The difference was immediately apparent. Cave positions that had required hours of suppression fire before napalm strikes now fell to simple infantry assault. Flamethrower teams found that many caves needed no additional treatment. The napalm had done its work so thoroughly that positions were abandoned or filled with dead defenders. By evening on February 23rd, the 28th Marines had advanced further up Suribachi's slopes than in the previous 3 days combined. The breakthrough came not from increased infantry courage — the Marines had been fighting with maximum intensity since landing — but from systematic destruction of defensive positions by a weapon that Japanese fortification design couldn't counter. On February 24th, napalm strikes expanded to cover the entire southern sector of Iwo Jima. Marine Corps Aviation flew 112 napalm sorties that day, dropping 33,600 gallons of jellied gasoline onto Japanese positions. The targeting was systematic. Aviation forward observers marked every cave mouth that showed defensive activity. Within hours, Corsairs would strike. Positions that survived the first strike received second and third applications until Japanese fire ceased. The Japanese response revealed growing desperation. Anti-aircraft fire intensified, as Kuribayashi recognized that American airstrikes were systematically dismantling his defensive system. But Japanese anti-aircraft weapons, primarily 25mm and 75mm guns, lacked the fire control systems to effectively engage fast-moving Corsairs. The Marine pilots flew with near impunity, their primary risk coming from Japanese small arms fire rather than organized anti-aircraft defense. Japanese cave defenders attempted various countermeasures. Some positions created secondary exit tunnels to vent smoke and gases, hoping to prevent oxygen depletion. This proved counterproductive. The vents simply allowed napalm flames to penetrate deeper as fresh air was drawn into the caves to feed the fires. Other positions installed crude blast doors made from steel rails and concrete. The doors protected against the initial napalm impact, but couldn't prevent the burning gel from flowing around or under the obstacles. The most desperate Japanese response came from positions that attempted to seal themselves completely. Cave mouths were blocked with rocks, sandbags, even steel plates from destroyed equipment. This prevented napalm entry, but created a different problem. The sealed caves became prisons. Without ventilation, the defenders suffocated from their own respiration within hours. American patrols found numerous sealed caves containing dead Japanese soldiers who had survived the napalm but died from oxygen deprivation. The morning of February 25th brought the dramatic conclusion of the Suribachi phase. At 1020 hours, a 40-man patrol from Easy Company, 28th Marines, reached Suribachi's summit and raised an American flag. The iconic photograph, taken as a larger replacement flag, was raised hours later, would become the war's most famous image. But the military significance was tactical, not symbolic. Suribachi, which Japanese planners expected to hold for weeks, had fallen in 6 days. The post-action analysis credited napalm with reducing the timeline by 10 to 14 days. Without the systematic cave destruction napalm enabled, Marine infantry would have required weeks of dangerous cave-by-cave fighting to clear Suribachi. Casualties would have been catastrophic. Instead, napalm strikes had neutralized an estimated 75% of cave positions before infantry assault, reducing Japanese defensive fire to manageable levels. The success at Suribachi drove immediate tactical changes across the entire Iwo Jima battlefield. Marine commanders who had been skeptical of napalm, considering it an experimental weapon of uncertain reliability, now demanded maximum application. Every division requested priority napalm strikes against cave systems in their sectors. The competition for available napalm became so intense that V Amphibious Corps established a priority system for targeting. Priority 1 targets were caves that directly threatened marine lines, typically artillery positions or machine gun nests, causing immediate casualties. Priority 2 targets were caves in assault paths, positions that would need to be cleared for planned advances. Priority 3 targets were caves identified by reconnaissance but not immediately threatening operations. The priority system ensured that limited napalm stocks were used where they would have maximum tactical effect. By February 26th, the systematic cave destruction campaign had evolved into a refined process. Reconnaissance teams, operating at night or during heavy weather when Japanese observation was degraded, would mark cave positions with colored smoke grenades. At dawn, corsairs would strike marked positions with napalm. By mid-morning, Marine infantry would advance to assess results. Positions still showing resistance would be remarked for additional strikes. Neutralized positions would be sealed by combat engineers to prevent reoccupation. The efficiency was remarkable. Cave systems that would have required hours of dangerous infantry assault could now be neutralized with 10 minutes of airstrikes and 15 minutes of engineer work. The casualty rate among Marine infantry dropped measurably as direct cave assault became increasingly rare. Japanese positions that should have taken days to reduce fell in hours. The Japanese High Command on Iwo Jima recognized the crisis but lacked effective countermeasures. General Kuribayashi's final radio message to Imperial Headquarters, transmitted on February 26th, acknowledged the situation with remarkable clarity. Enemy airstrikes using new incendiary weapon have negated our cave defenses. Deep positions previously considered impregnable are being systematically destroyed. Casualties from oxygen depletion exceed casualties from direct combat. Our defensive system is collapsing. The message requested immediate reinforcement or permission to conduct a massed counterattack, essentially permission to abandon the cave defense strategy and fight in the open, where Japanese infantry might have some chance against American firepower. Imperial Headquarters denied both requests. No reinforcements were available, and orders remained to defend every position to the death. Suribachi and his men were condemned to continue a defense that technology had already defeated. The final phase of systematic napalm employment came in early March as Marine forces pushed into the island's northern sector. Here, Japanese defenses reached their most sophisticated level. The terrain, a maze of ravines, ridges, and rocky outcrops, provided ideal cave defensive terrain. Suribachi had concentrated his most experienced troops here, along with his heaviest weapons and deepest fortifications. Marine intelligence estimated that over 60% of Japanese combat power remained concentrated in the northern sector. Previous Pacific campaigns suggested that reducing this final defensive zone would require weeks and produce casualties approaching those of the entire battle to that point. The terrain was so difficult that tanks couldn't operate effectively, leaving Marine infantry to assault prepared positions with minimal armoured support. Napalm changed the equation. On March 1st, Marine aviation began the most intensive cave destruction campaign of the Pacific War. 144 Corsairs flew continuous strikes against the northern cave complexes. The volume of napalm dropped over 40,000 gallons in a single day, exceeded total napalm expenditure in any previous single-day operation anywhere in the world. The strikes were concentrated in a rolling pattern ahead of Marine advances. As 4th and 5th Marine Divisions pushed north, napalm strikes would precede them by 300 to 500 yards, systematically destroying cave positions before infantry arrived. The coordination between ground and air became so refined that some strikes were delivered within 200 yards of friendly positions closer than conventional bombing doctrine allowed, but safe with napalm, because the weapon's effects were localized to the immediate target area. By March 5th, the pattern was unmistakable. Japanese resistance, though still fierce, was collapsing faster than even optimistic projections suggested. Positions that should have required days of infantry assault were falling in hours. The casualty rate among Marine infantry, while still heavy, was significantly lower than projections based on conventional warfare. The final Japanese defensive collapse came between March 6th and March 9th. As Marine forces compressed the remaining Japanese-held territory into an area less than 1 square mile, napalm strikes became concentrated to extraordinary densities. Some cave positions received 10 or more separate napalm applications, as Marine aviation ensured complete neutralization before infantry entered the area. On March 9th, the Amphibious Corps declared organized Japanese resistance suppressed. Small-scale fighting would continue for weeks as isolated holdouts were eliminated, but the battle for Iwo Jima was effectively over. The island had been secured in 25 days longer than the original 72-hour estimate, but far shorter than revised projections after the battle's difficult opening days. The final casualty accounting revealed the napalm campaign's impact. Total Marine casualties, 26,000, exactly matching the original worst-case projection. But the distribution of casualties told the real story. 78% of casualties occurred in the first week of fighting, before systematic napalm employment began. The final 18 days, dominated by napalm strikes, produced only 22% of total casualties, despite involving some of the heaviest fighting. Japanese casualties exceeded 21,000, killed virtually the entire garrison. Post-battle cave. Examinations revealed that an estimated 40 to 50% of Japanese fatalities showed evidence of asphyxiation rather than direct combat wounds. The oxygen-consuming properties of napalm had killed thousands of defenders who never saw an American Marine, never fired a shot in their own defense, but simply died when the air they breathed was replaced by toxic gases. The human cost of this technological killing method remains disturbing. Captain James Headley, a Marine combat engineer who entered hundreds of caves during post-battle clearing operations, recorded his observations in letters that survived in Marine Corps archives. The caves were full of dead men who looked like they'd simply fallen asleep. No visible wounds, no signs of struggle. They'd just sat down and died when the air ran out. We found entire squads dead in their fighting positions, weapons loaded and ready, but they'd suffocated before they could use them. The strategic implications of Iwo Jima's napalm campaign extended far beyond the immediate battle. Military analysts studying the operation recognized that fortification doctrine had fundamentally changed. Cave defenses, previously considered nearly impossible to reduce without prohibitive casualties, could now be systematically destroyed by air-delivered incendiary weapons. The tactical balance between offense and defense had shifted decisively. Japanese defensive planning for subsequent operations, primarily the defense of Okinawa and the Japanese home islands, had to be completely revised. The deep cave systems that Kuribayashi had pioneered on Iwo Jima were now recognized as death traps rather than refuges. But alternatives were limited. Above-ground fortifications were even more vulnerable to American firepower. Japanese forces faced an impossible choice: defend in caves where napalm would kill them, or defend in the open where conventional firepower would destroy them. The Okinawa campaign, beginning just 3 weeks after Iwo Jima's fall, demonstrated that Japanese forces had learned the wrong lessons. Rather than abandoning cave defenses entirely, they attempted to modify them, creating more ventilation, more exits, shallower depths. These modifications proved counterproductive. Better ventilation allowed napalm to penetrate deeper. Multiple exits created opportunities for Marines to attack from several directions simultaneously. Shallower caves offered less protection from conventional weapons without reducing napalm vulnerability. The final irony of the Iwo Jima napalm story emerged in post-war Japanese military analysis. Documents captured after Japan's surrender revealed that Japanese chemists had actually developed a similar incendiary gel in 1943. The substance, called Type B incendiary compound, was chemically similar to American napalm. Japanese testing showed effectiveness comparable to the American weapon, but the Japanese never deployed it operationally. Military priorities focused on kamikaze aircraft, suicide boats, and other weapons for desperate final defense of the home islands. Industrial capacity was insufficient to produce both conventional munitions and experimental incendiary weapons. The Type B compound remained in laboratories while Japanese soldiers died in caves that might have been defended if their own napalm equivalent had been available for counterattack. The technological parallel development demonstrated that scientific capability was not the decisive factor. Both nations had the technical knowledge to create jellied incendiary weapons. The difference lay in industrial capacity, logistics capability, and willingness to commit resources to unproven weapons systems. America could afford to experiment, to deploy, to refine napalm while maintaining conventional weapons production. Japan, its economy collapsing, could not. The legacy of Iwo Jima napalm operations shaped warfare for decades. Every subsequent military operation, involving cave or tunnel defenses from Korea to Vietnam to Afghanistan, employed tactics and weapons descended from those first used at Iwo Jima. The fundamental principle remained constant. Fortifications, designed to resist conventional weapons, often created vulnerabilities to unconventional weapons. Modern incendiary weapons, thermobaric bombs, fuel-air explosives, advanced napalm variants, all trace their lineage to the emergency deployment at Iwo Jima. The oxygen-consuming properties that killed Japanese defenders in underground positions inspired development of weapons specifically designed to destroy through atmospheric deprivation rather than explosive force. The moral implications of napalm warfare, particularly its use against civilian populations in later conflicts, remain intensely debated. But at Iwo Jima, the weapon's use was directed exclusively against military targets' fortified positions, defended by combatants who had chosen to fight from caves. The alternative to napalm was not peace, but rather prolonged infantry assault that would have produced catastrophic casualties on both sides. For the Marines who fought at Iwo Jima, napalm was salvation rather than moral dilemma. Corporal David Mitchell, who survived the battle and lived until 2003, spoke in oral history interviews about his perspective. "We were dying trying to dig the Japanese out of those caves. Standard weapons weren't working. Flamethrowers couldn't reach far enough. We needed something that could get to them where they were hiding. Napalm did that. It saved American lives. That's what mattered to us." The 72-hour transformation from experimental weapon to battle-winning system represented American industrial and logistical capacity operating at peak effectiveness. The ability to identify a tactical need, source an experimental weapon from laboratories and depots across the Pacific, transport thousands of gallons of dangerous chemicals to a combat zone, modify aircraft for new weapons delivery, train pilots on unfamiliar tactics, and coordinate the entire operation within 3 days would have been impossible for any other military force in World War II. Japanese forces on Iwo Jima never imagined that American innovation could operate at such speed. Kuribayashi's defensive planning assumed months would pass before Americans could develop countermeasures to cave defenses. Instead, 72 hours after the battle's crisis point, napalm-laden corsairs were systematically burning out positions that should have been impregnable. The final accounting of napalm's tactical impact came from V Amphibious Corps post-battle analysis. The report, classified until 1968, concluded, employment of napalm against cave fortifications reduced estimated battle duration by 14 to 21 days, reduced estimated final casualties by 8,000 to 12,000. Demonstrated that technological innovation, rapidly deployed, can overcome prepared defensive positions that conventional weapons cannot defeat within acceptable timeframes or casualty levels. The statistics were equally stark. Total napalm expended, approximately 400,000 gallons. Cave positions struck, estimated 2,100. Cave positions permanently neutralized by napalm alone, estimated 1,362%. Estimated Japanese casualties directly attributable to napalm, 8,500 to 11,000. Cost per gallon of napalm, approximately $4 in 1945 purchasing power. Cost per Japanese casualty eliminated by napalm, approximately $140 to $190. Compare these figures to conventional ammunition costs per casualty estimated at over $800, when including naval gunfire, artillery shells, bombs, and small arms ammunition required to kill or disable one enemy combatant through conventional means, and the economic efficiency of napalm becomes apparent. The weapon wasn't just tactically effective, it was economically superior to alternatives. The human dimension of these statistics remains troubling. Each number represented individual lives, Japanese soldiers who died in darkness, suffocated by weapons they never saw, against enemies they never faced directly. Many Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima were Korean conscripts or Japanese civilians pressed into military service. They died not fighting for imperial expansion, but simply because they were in caves when napalm arrived. This reality doesn't diminish napalm's tactical effectiveness or justify not using available weapons to protect American lives. But it does require acknowledgement that technological superiority in warfare creates moral complexities that statistics alone cannot capture. The weapon that saved Marine lives also inflicted deaths of particular horror, slow suffocation in darkness, as oxygen was consumed by invisible fires. The final testimony came from General Kuribayashi himself. His last radio transmission, sent hours before he died in a final suicidal charge on March 26th, included a remarkable acknowledgement. The American incendiary weapon has defeated our defensive system. Our caves, which should have protected us for months, became tombs within days. We trained for conventional warfare. We prepared for battles we understood. The enemy changed the rules with weapons we could not counter. This is how wars are lost, not through lack of courage, but through technological obsolescence. Kuribayashi's analysis proved prophetic. Japan's military doctrine, refined through decades of combat experience, proved inadequate against an enemy willing to deploy experimental weapons at scale, an enemy whose industrial capacity could turn laboratory curiosities into battlefield realities within days. The technological gap that killed thousands at Iwo Jima would only widen as the war continued, toward its atomic conclusion. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.